Welcome back to Check the System Design series. I am so excited about recording this episode as optimization is very close to all the web developers and the demand of web app. So not limited to that. Optimization is one of the most popular question in the interviews and that will also help you to become a senior developer. So I will be covering in-depth optimization techniques in multiple episodes. So before we start, don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon. Among many performance optimization technique, we are going to talk about the network optimization. What are the other type of optimization techniques? Let's talk about that, those layer. So we have assets, right? You have JavaScript, CSS, and you have images and a lot more. How to optimize that? So that comes in the asset optimization, network optimization, your network layer, how you can utilize that, build optimization, and definitely how you are going to monitor all of these. So we are going to cover in multiple episodes. In this episode, we are going to focus on network optimization. So what we are going to cover in this particular episode, let's quickly talk about that. The first one, which we are going to talk about in the network optimization. Okay, let me reset. Da da da. Okay. In network optimization, the things we are going to talk is first one is the lazy loading. Okay. So first, we will be covering lazy loading. What else? We will be also covering loading JS in a async fashion, loading JavaScript in async fashion. What else? We will be talking about content visibility, which is very important and cool technique we will be covering. What else? We will be talking about serving critical CSS and the techniques to do that. We will be covering the resource hints. What is that? So hold on with me. We are going to cover that. We are going to cover the caching layers as well. So caching using service worker. If you haven't heard about these technique, don't worry. We are going to cover in depth. What else? We will be covering caching using CDN and what are the headers basically that is going to help you to make it more beneficial. We are going to cover the client side rendering. We are going to cover server side rendering. We are going to cover the compression techniques. So we are going to cover this as well. Okay. Now what else? We are going to cover things which will help you to basically avoid the, you can say, layout shift and repaint, which is going to give you a browser or your application a better performance. Not limited to that, we have so many extra things that we are going to cover. So keep watching till the end and so many exciting things are waiting for you. First thing first, let's talk about how can we load our JavaScript asynchronously so that we can actually leverage the network layer, right? So we have a lot of limitation. We'll be talking about those limitation in terms of downloading the asset, how to download, when to download. But taking this example, basic HTML, where we have in the head, we have a script and in body, we have simple text to be rendered. So how generally browser basically renders this and how basically it downloads the asset. We'll be talking in detail, but let's see some glimpses of that. Okay. So in this particular case, when it encountered the script tag, what it is going to do, it was parsing. It see, oh, there is a script tag. Okay, let me do something. What is that something? It encountered a script tag over here. It started downloading it. So once it is downloaded, until it is downloaded, your parsing is stopped. So browser basically won't go into the parsing of the text, which is beneath that. So once that particular downloading is done, what is going to do next? Is it going to pass again? No, it is going to execute the script first. And then once the script is executed, it is going to pass again. So consider you have multiple script over here. In that particular case, your browser is going to download the script, execute, download, execute, and you won't be able to see anything in your web page or your browser basically unless your scripts are downloaded and executed. Dude, this is definitely going to hamper because you have a lot of scripts sometimes in your application. You have written a lot of maybe React application or you have written so many script, right? So you can't wait all the script to be downloaded. Sometimes it's like more than 300 KB or 400 KB, right? If you don't optimize it, it can be in MBs. You can't wait for a couple of minutes or couple of seconds basically in order to showcase something to the user. This is not going to work. Okay, before we actually dive into and see what are the benefits and what are the different ways, let's try to understand this thing in a very simple way. So consider you are dress up you wanted to go and chill out with your friend. You took a bike and you are basically about to leave your room. You are about to leave your house. Suddenly your dad encounter and you found that you are going to leave the house, and dad just says, dude, first clean your bike, get the petrol filled, and then only you can go out. Oh shit, my plan is screwed up. I was just about to leave with my friend in order to do a party, but as I was going out, my dad gave a responsibility which is to clean the bike, get the petrol filled, and then basically go out for the party. I'm late, right? This is something which probably I can't bear. What else can we do? Let's talk about the other alternative. Most of the folks may be aware, but let's talk in a different fashion altogether this time. Now, what if I say with this script tag, if I add a small thing which is, say, suppose async. I just go and say I wanted to make this async, and where basically async, I can make it as an attribute and I can attach it anywhere inside a script tag, right? I just add a async. What it is going to do, it is, let's try to understand. With this, your script, or you can say your HTML, is basically getting parsed, and it when it encounters a script, your script is going to be downloaded in parallel. But once your script is downloaded, the execution of that script will halt the parsing. Your parsing can't go ahead until unless the JavaScript is executed. Once the execution is done, then only the parsing is going to happen. Okay, dude, this is again something very strange. So now in this particular case, try to understand what is happening. So consider you are again ready and you wanted to basically go for a party. What your dad says, you can go, you can get the cleaning done on your way maybe, but you have to get the petrol filled before you leave for a party. Dude, this is again going to halt me for certain duration, but again it is going to halt me in order to reach to the party with my friends as soon as possible. What is the other better way? Now, say suppose we can optimize the same thing by saying that I have to actually wait for the cleaning, or I don't have to wait for getting the fuel filled before actually I leave. I can do this thing on the way, or something I can delegate once I am coming back from the party. How we can do that? We can use differ. So using this differ, try to understand what is happening. What you did, basically your HTML parsing will complete and there is no one who's going to halt your HTML parsing. What it meant by, you are going to see your content which is listed over here, which is hello Chirag, as soon as possible your parsing is complete. But whenever it encountered your script, it will download that script in parallel without halting your parsing, so that you can see your content as soon as possible. But once the parsing is complete, it is going to execute your script. It is as similar as you can get your vehicle clean on the way, but when you are returning back to the home, make sure you got your petrol filled. Yeah, so this is how basically your async behavior in JavaScript basically works. You can see how you are leveraging your network layer, how you are leveraging your network layer with just adding few attributes in your script, and you are making your web application fast so that your users, your viewer can see your content as soon as possible. Okay, this was one interesting thing. There are a lot more things that you can try it out. You can try it putting this particular script at the bottom of the body and let me know what do you see. Do you see a difference by using async differ and putting your script at the bottom? So I will be waiting for your comment. Lazy loading. So this is another yet very powerful technique. As the name suggests, I am lazy. Lazy in a sense, I am not going to halt the other work in order to complete this. I will do this job in parallel of doing the other stuff, right? This is how basically the lazy loading does. So consider this example. We have a web page, right? We might have used, like everyone uses the Facebook or the Instagram, right? There are so many images in the Instagram, so many stuff that is behind the fold. What is fold? The thing which is visible in your viewport and the things which are not visible in the viewport. Now we wanted to load the stuff which is not visible in the viewport using the lazy load, right? How we can do that? We can use a small techniques which will out of the box give this functionality and the feature. What to do? Let's see. We can use a small snippet which is going to help you with, which is, there is new attribute which is called loading, and you can pass multiple values to that. There are two very powerful values that you can pass. One is lazy and second is the eager. what is this lazy and what this basically eager says? Let's talk about that. So when you add anything lazy to any of your image or iframe, basically what it is going to do, it is not going to halt the parsing and the rendering of your web page. It is basically going to load this particular image in a async fashion. Now doing a lazy load, right? Now what are these two values? One is the lazy and second is the eager. So consider example, you have added this value in something like on your top of your screen, which is logo, right? Or something, some images or some icons which are visible basically using the img tag on your header, or something which is basically available on your viewport on the first screen itself, right? In that particular case, you want to load your hero images or hero asset in a eager basis. As the name says, eager, I am very eager, I am hungry, just give me as soon as possible, but don't halt my rendering of my web page. In that particular case, you can definitely use something called loading eagerly. Now anything which is behind the fold, just use which is loading lazy. Now what it is going to do, it is going to basically parse your web page, render your web page, load your images on the first fold with a eager fashion, and anything which is behind the viewport, basically you can load it using the lazy tag. This is going to give you a lot of benefit. Now even in your first fold, say suppose you have a hero image in terms of some banner, some logo, certain things which you wanted to load even at a faster rate. You don't want to load certain carousel images which is at the bottom of your viewport. You want to basically showcase the banner or your logo as soon as possible. Even then, you can decide some priorities among the pieces which are doing loading using the eager fashion. So how you can do that? You can use something called priority. This is very important and very interesting concept. So what you can do, you can add an extra parameter, extra attribute which says that load with me with low priority. So anything which is of the low priority in your viewport, you can put this attribute and your browser will take care of that. Definitely what it meant by, you wanted to load your logo in a eager fashion, but you wanted to load certain images in your eager fashion, but again you wanted to set the priority of it in a lower fashion, right? You wanted to set as a low. This is very interesting thing. It is very small feature, a small thing that you have to add in your document or in your code basically, and this is going to give you a lot of benefit. Just go and try it out. Although you have to apply certain strategies depending on when you are coming to the viewport, how to decide basically what to mark as an lazy and what to mark as an eager. We will be talking about those things in the coming episode as well, but this is what I wanted to highlight in terms of the lazy attribute, which is going to give you a lot of benefit. Just go and try it out. We will be talking about another lazy loading technique using intersection observer. This is a web API which is provided by browser, so you can easily use it using window dot you can say intersection observer. So let's try to understand this concept. What happens, although I have covered this in more detail in one of the mock interview which is related to autocomplete. You can find the link in the comment, you will get the detail, but let me brief you how this is basically happens. Okay, in this particular case, this is our viewport. So consider we have so many images like Flipkart cart page where you have, or you can say product page, or you have infinite scroll, or something, say suppose you have Google Photos where you have so many photos and so many content to be loaded, or so many visits that need to be loaded, right? So in such cases, basically what we can do, we can actually add some element at the end of certain, you can say, container or the div, which act as a sentinel element. We'll talk about that sentinel. What is that sentinel? So basically, if when we are scrolling and we encounter that particular element, we can basically take a decision, do I want to load some other items as well? So for this, we don't have to believe, you can say you have to wait on the scroll, or you have to trust on the scroll event, because those scroll events are very glitchy in terms of the performance. So you can use this intersection observer where you define this element as a sentinel element, and whenever your browser basically intersect that particular scroll intersect with that particular sentinel, you will get a callback, and based on that callback, you can take some certain decision. Didn't understand? Don't worry. We will see the code. We will try to understand from that as well. But from this particular image, you try to understand, you have image 1, 2, and you have 3 and sort of thing. You don't want to load everything, all the images, right? You just wanted to load first 2 images or 3 images, and once you basically have these 3 images in your viewport, or you have seen these 3 images, you wanted to load more images, right? How to do that? So after these two images, you added a sentinel element in your DOM. Once after scrolling, your sentinel elements come into the viewport, you will get a callback. Using that callback, you can take a decision to make another set of API call, get the images and add those images in your image list. That's it. Let's see from the code how you can achieve this. Okay. What you can do, this is the intersection observer API that we were talking about. You can create an instance of that. It gives basically two capability. One is the callback, which will be triggered whenever you encounter that particular sentinel element, and second is basically set of options. We'll be talking about both of them. But what we need to do once we basically create an instance of this intersection observer, you have to observe a element, which is, as we can say, a target element or a sentinel element. In this particular case, the sentinel element is this, which we have created and added in a DOM. If you wanted to try out, you want to see how basically it look like, go and check out the autocomplete mock interview. You will see a detailed description and detailed implementation over there. But over here, what we are basically doing, we are passing certain options. What are those options? These are very important and interesting thing. Basically, one thing is basically you have a route. Say suppose you actually want to scroll in certain portion or certain container inside your viewport. You don't want to actually do a scroll and do these strategies on the entire viewport or a document. You want this scroll, you want this infinite loading, you can say lazy loading, basically inside certain section. Maybe you have a search box or search pop-up which shows some suggestions. You want this capability over there. In that particular case, you can define your route to that particular suggestion list, and there are certain two parameter, which is route margin and the threshold. Threshold is again very important and interesting part. Say suppose this particular sentinel is wide enough or have a good amount of height. In that particular case, you wanted to make sure even you have actually crossed 50% of this div or the container, you wanted to get a callback. Based on that callback, you wanted to make a API call. Why this is important? This is interesting. You can consider you have certain images. Once you are actually crossed 20% or 30% of that image, you wanted to make sure you want other set of images, right? In that particular case, you don't want to give a loading experience to the user. That's how this is very important and interesting. And this is a callback which you get, and you can do lot more thing with the entries that you get as an parameter over here. If you haven't tried, just go and check out the mock interview related to the autocomplete and go and try out this particular intersection observer. This is going to stand out thing, and you will come back to thanks me. Content visibility. This is another very powerful way to lazy load, and that too with a very limited code changes that you have to do. You have to just add one property in your CSS, and out of box you are going to get a lot of improvement. So let's talk about that. So in this particular case, consider you have a web page, your web page is getting rendered, it has multiple folds. You see, you will be having a loading, you will be having some scripting time, there is a rendering, painting and system time, right? In this particular case, very important thing which you have to notice, the rendering time, which is taken from an example, which is 232 ms. By just adding a content visibility CSS property, which is auto, it actually reduced to 30 ms. And what it does basically, let's try to understand. By setting content visibility, which has multiple things, which is like hidden, you can set visible or you can set auto. Auto is something which is very great out of box. What it says that anything which is not visible in my viewport, I will do a lazy rendering of that particular thing. I'm not going to render it unless basically user is actually scrolling or reaching to that particular point. So it will just set the priority of the things which are on the first fold or in the visible area. It will try to load and render those things, and anything which is behind the fold, it is going to do that in a async fashion, or you can say in the lazy load fashion. This is damn cool. So it gives lot of other functionalities and capabilities, which says that even there are certain things, there are other attributes which you can try it out, which is like hidden sort of thing. Even it is like got rendered, but your screen reader is not going to attach those things, or the screen reader won't be able to basically read those things unless you actually scroll to those things. So there are so many things which is done behind the scene in order to improve that too with just simple thing. What it says that, it just says that content visibility is auto, and there is another property which you can set in order to just let browser know what is the size of the content which is going to be loaded in order to make this decision and optimization better for you. If you can predict, this is well and good. Even if you can't, it is going to do a lot of things for you in terms of the setting the content visibility. So if you haven't tried, just go and try it out. It is supported in most of the browser, but yes, you always check for these special properties, the backward compatibility or the browser compatibility in order to try it out. Let's go through another technique of lazy loading, which is serving critical CSS. As the name suggests, we have to make sure only the CSS which is critical we should load, and rest we can load afterwards. How can we do that, and how it is going to basically benefit in the network layer? We have to think your CSS can be multiple KB, sometimes it can be in MBs in some of the time if you have not optimized, and it takes some time in order to load from the network, right? And if you don't optimize, if you don't think about that, it can basically halt your rendering on your browser, right? In that particular case, what you can do, we have above the fold, below the fold. If you can segregate your above the fold critical CSS in a different file and rest other CSS which is not critical in the other file, and there is a technique which says that make the first thing which is blocking, and make sure once it is downloaded, parsed, and then only your web page basically renders. Rest is something it can be downloaded async and in parallel, basically using the lazy loading technique. How you can achieve, let's quickly see that. Okay, so there are two CSS basically we have broken down. One is the critical.css and other is the full CSS. In that particular case, what we are doing, the first one is something which will block your rendering until unless it is downloaded. It is, your web page is not going to render. But in the second one, we are using a trick which says that this CSS is having a media type of print. So dude, this is not something which is very critical. It will only be used for the printing purpose. But on the same time, we are saying just load this. Once your web page is loaded, your JavaScript is ready to execute, just on load. In that particular case, load this on your document load, make this media file as an all, which is eligible, or you can say available for everyone or for all the use cases in the CSS. What it is going to do, it is going to download and make it available for your next rendering and next set of things which are available below the fold. So this is very cool technique, and this makes your CSS non-blocking in terms of your rendering. Just go and try it out and you will definitely see a major performance boost, right? Just make sure you should not put anything which is very critical for the first fold inside your full.css, because in that particular case you will see some of your pieces of your application or your web page are breaking, right? So anything which is related to the navbar, sidebar, you want it to be loaded on the critical basis, don't put in the full.css, make it available in the critical.css. Give a try. Resource hinting, this is one of my favorite topic. Like I really love talking about it. Okay, so is there any way, as the name suggests, is there any way can we give a hint to the browser that these are the resources that are going to be used, or you can take some decision based on these resources given some hint? I will provide you some hint from the code perspective, so that browser can be more optimized, or it can make some network call or process certain things on a major priority basis, right? So what are those things? What are the different hints basically we can give to the browser for the different resources or the asset that we have? First come fast. So we can give preload, prefetch, preconnect, DNS prefetch, pre-render, and module preload. What are these? Let's try to understand one by one. Preload. Okay, so we have a web page. In this particular web page, we have certain JavaScript or there are certain CSS, right? Those JavaScript and CSS are going to be used just after you basically render your web page, right? In your rendering, it is required, that is critical. So in that particular case, can we give some hint to the browser? Go and just download, so that when it is actually rendering, we don't have to wait. While parsing, it knows already there is a request and it can leverage that. How can we do that? There is a small thing that you can basically do, which is you can actually add something called relation. REL is equal to preload in any of your JavaScript and CSS, where your browser will understand when I'm basically loading a web page, these are certain things which is very critical, and these are going to be used just in couple of, you can say, millisecond or the second, right? In that particular case, it will load and basically it will execute it. Now, in this particular example, you see there are certain chunks that will be basically used after, you can say, few visits are loaded, and these are basically used in couple of the visit. And as these are lazy loaded, but we don't want to show the loader experience to the user, what we can do, we can add a relation as is equal to preload. Basically we wanted to preload these asset or the chunk so that we don't have to show the loader. What it does, it actually shifts the loading of these chunks at the start of your rendering of your web page itself, so that it knows these are already downloaded thing. Whenever it is required, it can be used. Okay, but every time we may wanted to load something in the background, but we may not wanted to execute that, because that execution can be unnecessary if that is not available in your first fold altogether, right? In such cases, what you can do, okay, there is another hint that you can give to the browser, which is I want to load but I don't want to basically execute it. In that particular case, we can use, which is something called prefetch, which works like quite similar to what we have seen in a preload situation, but in this particular case it is not going to load, not going to execute. Let's see. We are loading example.com. The browser finds prefetch link. What it will do, browser fetch required content to display the prefetch pages, and basically it downloads and put it in the cache. So whenever you're at the time of your execution, at the time of your parsing of your content rendering it, if there is an asset which is needed, it will basically look from that particular cache, it will execute, and basically it's available. That script, that style is basically available to you. So where to use the prefetch? Any place where you don't want to get it executed, because that is not going to be used right away, it is going to be used afterwards, right? In those cases, try to use prefetch. But again, there may be certain use cases where you don't want to even download those assets, because you may not aware of the complete URL which is going to be used ahead in your code or your web page, right? In certain case, you can use some other, you can say, hints which is going to be helpful. What are those? Let's see. The next thing is your pre-connect. What it says, this is very very interesting and important. When you basically make any request to the server, it basically does a, you can say, DNS TCP TLS basically handshake, and after that basically it try to load a lot more thing. You make a request for the another asset, in that particular case also it will do a handshake, and then it actually try to load the thing. But as you know, I have to load, say suppose Google font, I have to load certain things which are there in my web page. In that particular case, I can utilize, or I can basically prevent that handshake to happen at the moment when I wanted it to be downloaded. I can do this handshake pre-hand, so that it actually save my time in doing a hi hello. So when you enter something, you enter a conference, you just do a hi, so that when you have to actually ask a question, in that particular case you have already done an introduction. It's quite similar to that. In that particular case, what you have to do is nothing special. You use a similar kind of attribute, which is rel is equal to pre-connect. So in that particular case, it will basically do a handshake with this particular domain, which, or a subdomain that you have provided, so that the next time wherever is required, it is just going to directly go and download it. Pre-connect may not be available in all the browser because it recently started being available. So you can try it out. Another thing which works in the similar fashion, which is you can use the DNS prefetch. It is the same thing. What it basically does, it actually make a handshake, and it is basically supported on the old browser. So nothing special. It's more about the fallback situation which you can see. Now, this is again very very interesting hint that you can give, which is, say suppose you wanted to basically render certain things or certain pages which you are going to load next, right? Or users maybe like going to request for this in the next cycle altogether, or user are going to basically click on a certain page, and you know that these are the pages which are highly visited. In that particular case, you don't want user to click, navigate, then start requesting, then downloading. This is a very powerful, what you can say, you can basically define any relation which is a pre-render, or what it will do, it will create a hidden tab content. With that hidden tab content, it will load your page including your JS execution. It will execute, it will throw the hidden tab away. Once basically after a certain time, it will throw away. If the user navigate, you can leverage it. What it meant by, you are on your main page, and you know mostly when a user comes, the user basically click on the login, or they click on the sign up, And there are the two possibilities. Most of the user are going to be doing a login, and after login you have to show the dashboard, the main dashboard. That is common for most of us, right? What you can do, once a user is doing a login, you can actually pre-render the dashboard out of the box, and it will basically load in the hidden tab or the tab content, and it will also execute, so that once a user click on the login, they redirect to a new page. The user navigate to a new page where your hidden tab, the execution thing which happened behind the scene, actually shows up. So in no time you will see your next page is available then and there itself. But again, it comes with a cost. You have to be very sure these are the next user or next pages basically which a user is going to navigate, else you will end up unnecessarily loading a lot of resources which is not required. And people who are in the low bandwidth or using the mobile data, they can actually end up wasting their data altogether, right? Or it can actually end up slowing down certain things. So use it with very precaution, but this is way powerful. Trust me, this is way powerful. Now, there is another very interesting thing which is resource hinting for the module preload. As now in the browser you can actually load the you can say modules all together. You can import those modules, you can leverage those modules. What we can do, we can provide this relation, this hint basically, which says that this is a module preload. And in this particular case, what it is going to do, it is going to basically load your ES module, and it is going to download cache, and it is going to compile your JS module code as soon as possible. This is way good example which you can leverage. Along with that, you can leverage this one more thing, which is if any resource, any module which is required within from your service worker as well, basically you can leverage this. So you can give a hint which says that I this is something which is going to be leveraged as a service worker. Just give a hint as a service worker, and you can load this module as well. What it will do, again, just note it down. What it is going to do, it is going to download, it is going to cache it, and it is going to compile it so that it is available for consumption then and there itself. So this is again very powerful if you are using the ES modules. Just go and try it out. These are a couple of the resource hint. If you haven't tried in past, I will request you just go and try it out, and you will see the performance impact in your production application. And if you are in an interview, if you are talking about this and you can detail it out, trust me, it is going to impact a lot of things, and it is going to make a very positive impact. Service worker. Service worker are way powerful in order to basically provide you a caching strategy or making offline applications, right? So in that particular case, there are so many cool things which are provided by service worker. But before we jump into what are the things which are provided, let's try to understand what are these service worker are. Service workers are something like proxy server which sits between your browser, your web page, and the internet. So in that particular case, any request which goes to the internet via the network, those are basically intercepted by service worker. Now, it has a lot of interesting thing. Using service worker, you can interact with your cache, you can interact with your index DB, and lot more. There are certain limitations in terms of what you can't do in terms of the DOM manipulation and sort of thing which can't be done via service worker. But again, apart from that, it actually holds a very good interceptor for any request that goes out basically on the internet world. Now, try to understand how these server worker are related our day-to-day life. I personally feel service worker is quite similar to our mothers. So how? It's very interesting. Like how a service worker can be related to our mother. So most of the time what happens, we can offload our work to mom. Just remind her, mom, I have to basically wake up at this particular time. Can you take care of the things which I have to do, or can you remind me at that particular time? Now, your mom will work in the background. She will make available everything in order to make you aware or make you awake of certain things. So she is there to basically do a lot of background job for you. Now, there are a lot of things she can actually do. She can actually provide you functionalities like push notification, which is like someone was seeking for you, right? And your friend was seeking for you. Anything that you wanted to be aware of happening nearby, your mother can give you a push notification. Actually, she can let you aware of the things which are happening around, right? So those are the cool thing. And again, in terms of the caching, just let your mother know you like certain foods. She will make sure she will have a lot of plethora of those things inside the house, so that next time you are looking for a similar kind of food or similar kind of taste, you don't have to look out for that. She will make it, cook it, and she will basically add a cache and store it in the house itself, right? So that next time when you're looking for it, she will quickly provide you the flavor, the food, the taste, and the best experience, right? So it's that's why I relate the service worker quite with the mom, which helps with a lot of interesting thing. Now try to understand in a different picture altogether, if that is helpful. So basically we can also try to visualize this in this form. You have a page, you have a caching layer, you have a network, and on the mid of that your service worker is sitting. What it meant by, any request where your page wanted to make, first it will go to the service worker. Now service worker, you can write your strategies, either it should look from the cache, or basically it should go to the network layer in order to fetch it. Now you can also make it more optimized and more advanced in a sense. You can say, you can write a logic. If you don't have internet connectivity, you try playing with the cache, you try to play and keep your data in the index db maybe, or any storage on the browser, and once the internet is back, basically you do all those operation on the network, so that even without an internet you can provide lot of good experience to your end customers, right? So this is how all the offline things that you might have seen, like Google Doc or anything which is working on the browser in the offline mode to provide you a better experience, those are basically using the service worker. And definitely that also helps you to build the PWA progressive web app. So now try to understand what are the different phases of the life cycle of the service worker, where you can actually fit your lot of use cases. So first thing is installing, right? So there is a file, basically there is a way, basically we will be talking about the code as well. You can basically write your code, you can initiate your service worker, and it will install in your browser basically. And the service worker instance which is created, it can be shared between the multiple occurrences in your tab also. Say suppose you have two tabs open for the same domain or the subdomain, and you wanted to have a communication between both of them, you can basically leverage that as well. So there are strategies and ways, we'll be talking about that as well. So first is the installation. So in this particular case, it is going to install the service worker. The second one is installed. In that particular case, what you can do, it will basically wait for other clients who were using the previous set of service workers sort of, in order to get it closed, so that you can have a fresh installment of the new service worker instance. Now it is activating it over here. You can take certain decision in order to clean up some cache, the previous cache, or you wanted to do some operation on the cache. Once it is activated, now it is ready to listen all the events that can happen over the, which you can basically transmit via the service worker. All these things you can do, and definitely this is redundant. If your service worker is replaced by another service worker, this is basically being called, you can take certain decision in order to do some cleanup or something you wanted to make sure. Now where the service worker basically resides in your browser, where you can see and how you can basically debug certain things. Then we will jump into the code part of that as well. Okay, over here let's have a look up. So in your browser, in your dev tool, basically we have an application. You can go into the application, you can try it out. If you haven't seen the service worker, go and basically tab into the service worker tab. You will see the service worker over here, and if service worker is activated, you can see the service worker ID and if in which state it is basically, and when basically it was set up, right? You will see all the events. You can actually do a testing. You can try pushing some operation over here. You can try to push something over here, or you can try to sync from something over here. You can update and register. You can play around, just give a try, play around that. But again, playing around that, first you need to basically understand how these different stages are and how you can leverage. So we'll go through quickly some glimpses, and I will also telling about, you don't have to actually learn all of these. There are small libraries and small tricks basically will help you to set up your service worker, and it is going to boost your experience. So let's talk about that. Basically first step is, in order to register, you have to do a small thing. You have to basically check if the service worker is available inside your web API narrator. If it is available, basically you can actually set up. If it is not available, you can't do anything. If it is available, what you have to do is just a simple thing. Using service worker, you have to register. This is the file, basically this is where your code will go for the service worker, right? Now what are the other things? There are simple steps that you can basically write in your service worker file. What are those? You can write the first installation step, which is this. You can write your activation, and you can define what will happen in case of the fetch. If something is basically looked after via the network call, how basically you wanted to respond from your service worker, right? From the installation, you can see what is basically we are doing. We are basically trying to open a cache with certain name. We wanted to add some files to that particular cache, and we wanted to make this available when a person is basically looking for the fetch calls, right? In all those cases, you can define you wanted to basically fetch these files from the cache only or cache first approach. There are different approaches that we can talk about, right? Second is if it is activated or not, so that you can start listening a lot of the event. Now the third important event is your fetch, right? In this particular case, what we are doing, you can basically look for the request. You can basically fetch for the which URL this request is being made. You can get to know you can check the origin and everything inside your logic. Now based on that, you can decide you wanted to do a cache first or a network first approach. Based on that, there are a lot of strategies which you can define. If it is a cache first, you can define you wanted to look up from the cache or you wanted to make a network call. First you wanted to basically look up for the cache. If it is not available, then probably you wanted to go and make a network call, right? In case of network first, you can see in this particular case what is being made. We are fetching from the network and we are basically putting that particular data into the cache, so that if the next time someone is looking for the cache first approach, in that particular case our cache is already having those data, right? So you can do a lot more interesting thing, and we can also see if there is some error. Basically, in order to fetch the network call, you can actually land back into the cache strategy also, right? So many things can be done using the service worker and these events that we have talked about. I have just given you a glimpses so that you can basically go and try it out, because this is very, very cool. If you haven't actually looked into this, so trust me, you are a step behind and you have to give a look into this. Now, say suppose you have to build a lot of complex use cases. In that particular case, you don't want to write all of these method and all of your implementation. Can be there some way to write you can say standard code or good quality code with a very less things that you have to peep into, right? Yes, there is something called workbox which gives you out of box lot of capability, and it gives you things to enrich lot of things. So taking example, prefetching is something that you can do using workbox. You can actually define some caches on the runtime strategy. You can actually define the strategies. You can build your own strategies like I wanted to make a cache only or cache first, network only, right? You can define cache and network, right? First try to look from the cache. If it is not available, make a network call, right? You can define a routing. So the request which is coming from this particular path, you wanted to basically make a request to a different server or different you can say web altogether, the server altogether, right? You can basically define very easily the background sync processes, right? You can actually help a lot of like good debugging capabilities you will get with the workbox. So if you haven't tried, go and try it out. We are going to talk about very interesting concept, which is client-side rendering, server-side rendering, combination of client-side rendering and server-side rendering, static rendering and pre-rendering. Hold with me, this is going to basically change the way you think about how to create a web app, right? Now, before we jump into what is this client-side, server-side, and basically understanding the pre-rendering and the static rendering, let's try to understand very basic and the fundamental things which is going to help you in order to understand this important thing. So first thing first, what is the server side? So consider example, you are requesting for I wanted a login page or I want a dashboard. This is a request which goes from a browser to the server. Now your server basically does some certain things. What it does, it basically processes the request for this particular route, which is /login and /dashboard. It generates the HTML, it generates the relevant JavaScript and everything, and it ships, right? So your server got a responsibility to generate and ship for each and every route where the user is requesting for. This is basically a server side rendering. Every route, every request goes to server decide what need to be rendered, and it gives you the final HTML that need to be rendered. Now, coming to the second part, which is our client-side rendering. In this particular case, what your server gives the JS, respective, you can say CSS and all sort of thing. Now, your browser does certain things. What it does, browser start understanding the routing. So say suppose is the similar example, someone was on the dashboard, the home page / now he wanted to go into the login. Now, in order to get the data or the HTML for /login, your browser is not going to make a request to the server. your browser is capable enough to understand there is something called /login and I should basically get the data from the local chunks altogether. Although while rendering it require any extra JavaScript or chunk, it can go to the server, that is different thing. But for your routing purpose, your landing page, which is required in order to do the routing, you don't need any server in order to tell you for this particular route, you need different set. No, everything is managed on the client. Okay. Now, what are these things which are in between? Let's try to understand, and we'll understand its benefit and which one to use and when to use, what all you can do. Static SSR. What it meant by, when basically you are building your application, when you are writing something like npm run build or doing the similar kind thing on the server, what it does, say suppose you are creating some blog and you know you have thousands or say suppose 100 pages with a static data. What you can do, you can build those 100 web pages all together and you can put that web pages directly on your browser, so that anytime web page is requested, you basically go and serve that static web page directly from the server. Okay, this is cool, right? Because there is no dynamic thing, no API request, we can avoid a lot of things and you can directly serve the already pre-generated web page, right? The second thing, which is again very popular, people call it server-side rendering with rehydration. What it meant by, you might have used React or Angular by using the server-side rendering. What it does, it creates a web page, it's basically generate your HTML, but that HTML needs some events to be there, right? Say suppose you have a form. In form, you wanted to add some event handling on change of this, on blur of that, on different events are there. You want those events to also work. But on the server, your server don't understand these events. What it will do, it will generate this HTML and it will give to the browser. Now, browser have a responsibility to rehydrate it. Rehydrate in a sense, you have given me HTML and I know the events which need to be binded. I will bind these events so that your web page become interactive now. Before hydration, your web page is not interactive. So this is basically called your server-side rendering with the rehydration. Now, there is another concept which is called client-side rendering with the pre-rendering. What does it mean by? This is very interesting concept. What it says that I'm not going to basically render everything on the server. What I'm going to do, I'm going to just give you a shell and it will have the basic HTML and things rendered. Rest of the things client is going to take care of in order to render. But over here, any dependency which you have in terms of the JS, in terms of the CSS or anything which need to be loaded at a faster rate, I will make sure I get those dependency and inject those dependency in your web page itself, so that when you are doing a client-side rendering on the client, on the browser, you don't have to look for those dependencies. Those can be made advanced, right? This is very cool. Now, you will find a lot of the application, old application that was built on the 100% server-side rendering. You will find a lot of application which is like on the pure, you can say client-side rendering. And there are a lot of application which are blog related, which are built on the server side, the static server side rendering and using the rehydration. So there are two very popular these days, these mechanisms which people are using. One is client side rendering with the pre-rendering mechanism and the server side rendering with the rehydration mechanism, right? These are two ways which is very popular. Let's try to understand a couple of more important things over here. What are those? First, let's try to see who is basically using it. In this particular case, you can see the Gmail was using it very actively. Even you see the static one, the Netflix was using for a lot of the static pages. The server-side rendering with the rehydration, you can say Next.js is built and on the same concept, and even the Razor is based on the same concept. So client-side rendering with the you can say pre-rendering, this is used by Gatsby and the ViewPress, and full you can say client-side rendering is used by most of the application, right? So although there are a lot of strategies in terms of the Gmail is also trying to use, you can say client-side rendering with the pre-rendering, like these are the different applications or the companies which keep on experimenting and trying between the lot between. Now, there are a couple of things that we have to understand. What is the cost of these different mechanisms, right? The first one, which is server-side rendering, it is going to cost you a lot in terms of your infra size. Reason, every request need to be handled from the server. Second, this is going to cost you in terms of when you are building and you have to keep all those assets on your browser. Your storage is basically going to be very costly. In terms of server side rendering with the rehydration, your infra cost is going to be costly, and you have to basically think about the JS size as well, right? Because infra cost, because most of the request basically is going to be on the server, and that need to be rehydrated on the client side, right? This is going to cost you JavaScript, because you just get the cell and rest everything is basically going to be costly operation in terms of the JavaScript need to be loaded and a lot more. This is 100% you can say JavaScript, because the server takes care of nothing. It will just give you the HTML, and from there the parsing, loading, rendering, getting those JSs and rendering on the web page. Everything is taken on the client. Now, along with that, this is very interesting, which is time to interactivity is as close your, you can say, first contentful paint. Although this is very recommended, if you have your time to interactivity and your first contentful paint very close, this is very good, right? It is almost equivalent, and in this particular case you can see this is also equivalent, but your TTFB is very fast in this particular case, right? So time to get your first byte, which is again, this is a flexible approach. You can do a lot of things in terms of the SSR with the hydration. This is again doing a CSR with the pre-rendering is something which you can leverage. You can do a lot of optimization over here. So just go through this and try out these different things. You will definitely find, depending on your use cases, you are going to leverage a lot of stuff over here. So don't forget to try it out and keep watching. Compression. This is another very small but very powerful technique. What it meant by. So consider example, I think most of folks have already used foam mattress. Basically in that particular case, how those are shipped, those are rolled packed and those are delivered to your home. But how those small wrapping basically converts into an actual mattress. What you have to do, you have to just cut the cover. It will basically roll up and roll out basically, and you will see after certain time, after getting the air available, it will actually block into the normal size of your mattress. Or you might have seen some crystals. Basically in those crystals are small thing you have to put into the water, and it actually glows up to a bigger size, and those are very eye-catching sort of thing, right? So we have seen a lot of these things which are basically very helpful in order to transmit from one place to the other place. Else basically it is going to occupy a lot of the space, right? Similar kind of thing happens with your assets as well. When we say assets, your JavaScript, CSS, the images and whatnot. So consider, instead of shipping your 300-400 KBs of files through the network, what if I say I'm going to compress it using some encoding, and basically browser knows how to decode it. So in our case, say suppose the water was one of the medium in order to decode, or say suppose the air was another medium in order to decode, right? So similar thing, if the browser understand the way I have encoded from the server, if browser also understand how to decode it, then our job is simple, right? We can compress it from the server, and in the network layer, those compressed file which converted from the 300 KB to a small, you can say 60 KB file. 60 KB is definitely a very cheaper as compared to the 300 KB, right? So there are two very popular strategies which browser also understand. One is the Brotli and second is the gzip. So we can see a comparison. Even the Brotli is far better than the gzip. We can see one of them is from the OYO, which they have shared the report and the thesis from there. We can see earlier the size was around we can say 38 KB sort of, and now you can see it's around 30 KB over here, right? So that's a difference we can see. It has a lot of reduction in approximately 8 KB reduction, right? By just enabling a Brotli. So that's a big deal, right? So you get a lot of things. Now there is still some browser which does not understand the Brotli compression. In that particular case, how we can leverage it? We can add a strategy which says that from the browser, hi server, please serve me the any file which is maybe sitescript.js, and I can understand both the browser and Brotli and the gzip, right? This is your browser says. Then in that particular case, your server is going to give you one with the Brotli comparison, right? In that particular case, you are getting a lot of benefit because the size is small. But there are legacy browser which does not understand. They will say, I just understand the gzip, right? In that particular case, what browser is going to give? Browser is going to give you the gzip version of that. So now in that particular case, you can leverage the Brotli compression, but also taking care of the legacy browser. In the starting of this video, we have talked about how JavaScript delay or the CSS delay loading from the network can impact the performance, right? Now it's time to dive into the detail actually what is happening and why this is impacting. We will be going through the render cycle and we'll try to understand different cycles, different phases of this rendering cycle, and what are the things that you have to take care of in order to make your web application more performant, right? So we'll be talking about layout shift and the repaints that happens because of certain things not taken care in a certain fashion. Now let's understand the rendering cycle. So first thing is you have to request your page. You will get a HTML. From that HTML, you will get the response. From your response, in a sense, if there are certain CSS or if there are certain JS, those will be downloaded. To note, it is very important, any CSS or HTML basically which is on your head, and those are in general basically render blocking or parsing blocking, right? So your render blocking, basically you see anything is not going to render until unless your JavaScript or CSS are basically loaded. And similarly, if your CSS is not loaded, it is not going to block your parsing, but it is going to block your rendering, right? This is very important thing to note. Once you have a response, your DOM is created. You are aware of the DOM tree basically which is created. From that DOM tree, now you have your HTML, you have your CSS, both of them get combined and there is a recalculate styles is done and the CSS OM is basically created. Now, depending on what strategy basically is being used in order to load your JavaScript, now your JavaScript is basically executed over here. Once a JavaScript is executed, you get your DOM and CSS OM merged. So now there was a DOM, there was a CSS, now CSS OM, that rules for the CSS was generated. Both of them get merged in order to create your render tree. This is very important phase we have to understand, right? You created certain rules. With that rule, we have CSS OM, we have DOM tree, which talks about the structure and different div and different layouts that you have in your DOM tree. And now both of them got merged in order to create a render tree. From there, the layouting is basically done. When we say layouting is just, you can consider whenever you see a big buildings in metro cities, how they are basically structured. They are structured based on the pillars. First the pillar, the blocking and everything is done, then the walls and everything is basically structured and your interior is done, right? Similarly, you have a long tall building where the pillars are basically configured, or you can say established. After that, what is happening, you basically build your different walls, and then your paint basically starts, right? Your painting is like you get things started furnishing in your empty house, and finally once everything is configured, you start basically putting the items at their different places. Like you put your TV, you put your sofa and different thing in your house, right? That is basically a pixel perfect thing which is basically drawn on your screen. So in similar fashion, you can basically relate from a building construction to getting things basically created and segregated using your walls, and then getting it painted, and so that you have full furnished marble tiles and whatnot painting is done, and then finally placing those things in your home. So similar thing happened over here. Now you have to understand, with taking the same example, there are certain things which are taken care of, or the terminologies that you should be aware of, right? First thing is composting, second is painting, third is layout, parsing, right? These are the terminologies you should be aware of. Now try to understand, there are certain scenarios which are very costly. When I say costly, consider example, once your house got built, your setup got built, you realized, oh dude, my kitchen is way small, I want to increase my kitchen size. What do you have to do? Think of, in order to increase the size of your kitchen, you have to shift your wall to increase the size. You have to again get the denting, painting, marble and sort of thing. And then again you have to basically, in order to make your kitchen modular, you have to make some major changes, and in order to put the different item in your kitchen. This is way costly. What if you have to just say, okay, everything is perfect, I just wanted to place my refrigerator from this wall to that particular wall. That is way cheaper, right? So now let's put those terminologies inside the rendering. So how this is basically going to happen. Consider there was a change. There are two type of change basically. One is just going to trigger your repaint, which is just shifting your refrigerator from one location to the other location. It is not going to impact anything. Second kind of thing, anything which is related to the dimension, anything which is related to the user interaction or the JS operation, those are basically going to actually change the dimension of your kitchen as well, right? In that particular case, it will go through again creating the layout, again doing a painting, and finally putting it into the pixel perfect thing. Now let's try to understand what are the different things, what are the different properties which can basically impact this and which can be main cause for this. Let's understand that. We have seen these phases, right? So anything which is related to the like downloading the JavaScript, because of the JavaScript, if there is any impact in the CSS home or the DOM, basically taking care of that. Anything which is basically going to impact your CSS home, right? Then basically there is a layout in a term, the similar thing we talked about, the building structure which need to be created. Painting is again making it full fun, you can say making it denting, painting, marble and whatnot, the painting done with that. Composting is basically this is very interesting, we talked about above. This is the final, like putting your pixel perfect and the items in your house at a different places. One thing which we have to also consider over here, it also do consider the different layers that we have. So in your web page, say suppose you have a model that comes in a different layer altogether, right? You hover on certain things, you see the different tooltip and different layout. All the dialog box model which you see, those are the different layers, right? Even you use position absolute side of thing or position fixed, those are the different layer kind of thing. Those are handled in this particular composting phase. Now try to understand, if we try to make any change in our styles using JavaScript or CSS, which is going to change our dimension, what are those dimension property which can be changed? Let's quickly peep into that. These are the properties which can basically trigger all of these cycle. Either you are changing from here or here, it doesn't matter. Either you are using JavaScript or the stylings. Basically, what are the phases it has to go? It has to basically go through layouting, which is basically creating your building structure. Second is painting, getting it furnished using your paints and basically getting the marble, everything perfect. Then finally composting, putting things in a different layer, making it final, giving it a final touch by placing the different items, right? All of these has to be taken care of. This is very costly. What are these property? Anything which is related to your height, which is related to your width, anything which is related to the dimension. So even if you're trying to read certain properties which are related to the dimension, you can see which is related to the offset or client height. So all of these are going to trigger all of these phases, which is very costly. Why these are very costly? Because browser have to give the latest values of these dimension whenever you are looking for, even that is read, not write, right? This is very important to note down. Anything which is related to the offset, again, those are going to be very costly. Anything which is actually going to make your scroll to top, or we might have used scroll X or Y sort of thing. All of these are very costly, and these are going to basically trigger all of these phases. Now, what better we can do? What are the properties which can actually save something in this particular cycle or these phases? So the other set of properties which are very important and cool to understand, anything which is related to your background color or even your text color, right? Anything which is related to shadows, right? Anything which is related to visibility. These are, and there are a couple of more, these are basically going to do a very good job for you, which is it won't do a layout shift. In this particular phase, it will basically, definitely if there is anything from the JavaScript or style, that is going to be there, but it is directly going to jump into the paint, and it is going to directly jump into your composting. It is not going to do anything which is related to the layout shift, and which is very important thing. If you can basically avoid, this is very time consuming, and this takes a lot of you can say computation for the browser in order to basically draw the final pixels on your web page. Now there are other cool things which you can do. You can even avoid your paint, you can directly jump into the composting compost step. How you can do that? There are two properties which helps to do that. One is transform, and second is the playing with the opacity. These are the two things which is even going to remove two different phases and important phases, which is your layout and your paint. You can directly, or definitely from any place we are doing, you can directly jump into the composting over here. And this is way good. So that's why you might have seen anyone who wanted to play with some sort of animation where you wanted to change the dimension of your you can say dialogue, or you wanted to change, or you wanted to play some animation placing a component or a visit at one place, and you wanted to do a transition to a different place. In that particular case, it is recommended not to play with the dimension width and height of this. Instead of, you can basically do a transitions which are going to help you out, right? Or do a opacity, play with the opacity. These are the two things which is going to help you even the composting. Now the question comes, even why these things actually matters. Like, even if we ask our browser, dude, do some extra work, then what's the harm for a browser in order to do an extra work which is layouting? What it costs? Let's understand what it costs for the browser in order to do that, and why this is important. Let's understand very interesting concept, which is frequency, or you can say refresh rate, and how this is related to, you can say, different devices, and how it is even related to what we just talked about, right? Try to consider, when we are scrolling our web page, what we wanted to see. We wanted to, even we are scrolling fast, we wanted to see some content on that. We don't want to make it Shaktiman, right? What it meant by, we scroll and we see something is happening weird, but we are not able to see anything, right? We don't want to make Shaktiman. People who are aware of Flash, we also don't want to make it Flash. Like, we don't know what happened in behind, we are not able to see anything in between when you are scrolling, and we don't need that experience at all when we are scrolling or doing some activity on your web page, right? So for that, there is very interesting thing that we have to understand, which is a frequency, or which is a, you can say, device refresh rate. So most of the browser, most of the devices that we have has a frequency of 160, you can say 60 hertz over here, which is equivalent to what it meant by, it is going to basically render or refresh your screen 60 times in a second. Okay, what it meant by 60 times in a second, then how many frames do you see in a second? Any guesses? I small math, let's do that. How many frames we are going to see? In that particular case, what we are saying, in 1 second, how many frames basically we need, or how many times it is going to refresh? It is going to refresh 60 times. So this is equivalent to your 16.67. These number of the frames basically we have to show within that 1 second. So you can understand, a browser have got a job in order to complete whatever we talked about, your styling, layouting, paint, and your composite, whatever activity you are doing within this particular interval. Don't you think this is crazy? This is way crazy. For this, it is going to be 16.67, but there are few devices which actually works on 160 hertz, where you wanted to show better experience when you are playing the game. You wanted to have a very refined, you don't want those delays between the frames, and you wanted to be very real time active on that, right? So in those particular cases, now devices are having 120 hertz as well, which is these many frames that need to be rendered in a second, right? These many times it need to be rendered. How many frames is like 8.33 ms is required in order to basically render a single frame. Now this is even complex and tougher. Now this is very tedious. If we have to basically so understand, even if we are not able to do in 16 or 16 ms, actually, which is not a 16 ms, I will tell you very frankly, because their browser have to do lot of other thing in order to basically make the render the one frame, right? So behind the scene, actually, if you see, you actually got 10 ms in order to render a single frame, so that you don't give a Shaktiman wala experience to your users. In that particular case, you have to make sure whatever activity is being done can be completed within 10 ms by the browser, so that there is no glitch. And what it meant by, you might have seen, you are actually doing something and your browser hangs. You are scrolling, your browser hangs. You are not able to see certain things when you are doing a very frequent scrolls, and your screen gets blank, right? These things happens basically when your browser is not able to complete the expected stuff within your 16 ms, or you can actually say which is 10 ms, right? So you have to make sure these things which we talked about, layout shifting and the repainting, why this is important. If you give browser to do a less job, then browser can make sure these things happen within a given interval, which is within a required ms which is there, right? Which is 16 ms for the browser. Now there are a couple of more interesting things which we have to understand. Say suppose we are loading multiple fonts. In those particular case, can we club those fonts in order to render them in one time, load them in one time and apply to in the one time altogether, right? Can we set the height and the width of the images when actually it is going to the render for the first time, instead of it is deciding the height and width of the images when it is actually rendering it, right? can we basically use the SVG placeholder for the images and the videos to reserve the display box, so that it does not basically create a layout shift when actually actual images are basically rendered. So there are so many interesting things that you have to think about in order to avoid these things. Whoa, this was a powerful pack with the network optimization, and there are so many things that we wanted to cover in the optimization in the upcoming episode. This is just a start. We are going to cover the asset optimization, we are going to cover the build optimization and the performance related stuff, how to monitor. A lot more is coming in the upcoming episode. So keep watching. And with that, just wanted to recap what we have basically learned over here. We talked about the lazy loading. We have seen the tricks related to how you can load your JavaScript in async fashion. We have gone through the content visibility, serving critical CSS, resource hinting, caching with the using the service worker. We have talked about the client side rendering, server side rendering, pre-rendering with the server side rendering, static rendering. We have covered the compression techniques. We have also covered the layout shift and the repaint. We have covered so many interesting and so many things are coming in the upcoming episode. So don't forget to like, share and subscribe to this channel so that you are always up to date on the upcoming stuff, and there are so many cool things which are coming. So let me know in your comment if you have tried any of these methods in previously, or you get this benefit from all these techniques that we have leveraged. So keep watching Chakde System Design.